November 12, 1970. A night that would change everything. Over the Bay of Bengal, a monster storm spins with terrifying power. And it's heading straight toward millions of sleeping people. For weeks, weather stations had watched this system grow. Scientists tracked its path. They issued warnings. They calculated its strength and its trajectory. The numbers were frightening. This wasn't just a strong storm. This was something extraordinary. This was the kind of cyclone that only comes once in a lifetime. Or never at all. Yet by midnight on November 12th, hundreds of thousands of people had no idea what was coming. They would not survive to see the morning. Most storms kill because of wind. The wind tears buildings apart. The wind throws debris like missiles. But this storm would kill for a different reason. It would kill because of where it hit. And because the people who lived there had nowhere to run. To understand what happens on this night, you need to understand the Ganges Delta. It's one of the most remarkable places on Earth. Two of the world's mightiest rivers, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, meet here. Where they meet the sea, they create something extraordinary. One of the most fertile regions in the entire world. The delta stretches acre, SAS only protected by a thin line of natural barriers. Small ridges, river banks, mangrove forests, nothing engineered, nothing built by humans to withstand a true catastrophe. There were no seawalls, no storm surge barriers, no evacuation infrastructure. Most villages had no way to alert people to danger. There were no shelters, no safe places built above sea level. The people who lived in the delta understood one unchanging truth. They lived at the mercy of the sea. One bad storm. That's all it would take. In early November 1970, something began to form. Over the warm waters of the Bay of Bengal, tropical air masses collided. Moisture-laden winds spiraled upward. A depression formed. At first, it was nothing remarkable. Just another tropical system in a season that had seen many. But the conditions were perfect for disaster. The water temperature was at its warmest. The upper-level winds were in ideal alignment. There were no wind shear patterns to tear the system apart. This depression had room to grow. And grow it did. Within 24 hours, it had become a tropical storm. Wind speeds climbed past 60 kilometers per hour. Within 36 hours, it was a severe tropical storm. Wind speeds exceeded 100 kilometers per hour. Scientists watching the satellite imagery couldn't believe the speed of intensification. By November 11th, it had become something even more dangerous. A severe cyclonic storm. Wind speeds were now over 160 kilometers per hour. Over 100 miles per hour. The atmospheric pressure kept dropping. Lower and lower. This wasn't just a major storm anymore. This was one of the most intense cyclones ever recorded in this part of the world. And its track was pointing directly at the Ganges Delta. Meteorologists issued warnings. Pakistani weather officials released alerts. Radio stations broadcast warnings about the approaching danger. But warnings only matter if people receive them. And if they understand them. And if they have somewhere safe to go. The warning system in East Pakistan was primitive by modern standards. There was no mass communication infrastructure. Most villages didn't have radios. The few warning messages that were broadcast used technical codes. Most people didn't understand what these codes meant. On the outer islands, there were no radios at all. No way to hear any warning. Many fishermen were at sea on the night of November 11th. Ships that should have sought shelter were caught unaware. Small fishing boats had no way to receive warnings. No radio equipment. No way to know what was coming. Farmers were in their homes, tending to harvest preparations. They heard nothing. They knew nothing. Families gathered for the evening meal, unaware that the night would never end for them. The government seemed distant and unconcerned. East Pakistan was governed from West Pakistan, over 1,000 miles away. Officials in the capital had other priorities. They did not seem to grasp the scale of the danger. They did not mobilize resources. They did not prepare shelters. They did not coordinate evacuations. It was as if the government had decided that the Delta didn't matter, that the lives of poor fishermen and farmers didn't matter, that preparing for disaster was not worth the effort. At around midnight on November 12th, the cyclone made landfall. It struck the offshore islands of the Ganges Delta almost directly. The eye of the storm passed near the densest population centers. What happened next came with terrifying speed. The storm surge arrived. This was the true killer. Not the wind, not the rains, but the ocean itself, rising up and advancing like an unstoppable tsunami. Survivors would later describe the horror. A wall of water appearing in total darkness, rising faster than anyone could comprehend, rising faster than anyone could run. In some areas, the water rose over 10 meters high, over 30 feet. A tidal wave of ocean water, pushed by hurricane-force winds. For people living just a few feet above sea level, this was instant catastrophe. Homes were swept away in seconds. Families were torn apart. Most didn't even have time to scream. In the lower islands, the water came at night. Parents grabbed their children. They tried to run. They tried to swim. Most were swept away by the current. Most drowned in the darkness. Boats on the water capsized instantly. There was no time to abandon ship. No time to signal for help. Fishermen disappeared into the churning water. Entire fishing fleets were erased in minutes. Inland villages that had stood for centuries were obliterated. The surge swept through homes, tearing them from their foundations. Trees were uprooted. Livestock was killed. Crops were destroyed. The landscape was transformed into a wasteland of water, mud, and debris. By dawn, the Delta had changed forever. Islands that existed the previous morning had vanished. Entire communities had been erased. The water slowly receded, revealing scenes of absolute devastation. The death toll was almost incomprehensible. At first, authorities had no idea how many had died. The communication systems were destroyed. Roads were gone. Transportation was impossible. It took days to begin assessing the scale of the disaster. As reports came in, the numbers grew larger and larger. Thousands dead. Tens of thousands dead. Hundreds of thousands dead. Official estimates varied widely. Some said 300,000. Some said 400,000. Some estimates went as high as 500,000 people. The exact number will never be known. Many bodies were never recovered. Many communities were so devastated that an accurate count was impossible. But what was certain was this: the Deadliest Cyclone had killed more people in a single night than any tropical cyclone in recorded history. More deaths than Typhoon Haiyan. More deaths than Cyclone Nargis. More deaths than Hurricane Katrina. More deaths than any hurricane that had struck the Americas. This single storm on this single night was the deadliest cyclone ever recorded anywhere on Earth. The vast majority of the dead were poor people. Fishermen, farmers, families with nothing, people who had no resources to evacuate, no vehicles to escape in, no information that danger was coming. They simply died in the water, in the darkness, without warning or preparation. The aftermath was chaos. Survivors were stranded in waterlogged regions. There was no clean drinking water. Food was scarce. Medical help was almost impossible to find. Hospitals had been destroyed or overwhelmed. Disease began to spread rapidly through the weakened population. The government response was slow and inadequate. Relief supplies trickled in days after the disaster. International aid was delayed. For a population already marginalized and poor, the disaster felt like the ultimate abandonment. The government in West Pakistan seemed almost indifferent to the catastrophe. They did not mobilize their own resources. They did not coordinate relief efforts. They did not seem to grasp that 500,000 of their own citizens had just died. To the people of East Pakistan, it was a revelation. Their government didn't care about them. They were second-class citizens. Their lives didn't matter to the leaders in the distant capital. Within weeks, elections were held. The people voted overwhelmingly for change. They voted for the Awami League, a political party that promised to fight for their rights. They won by a massive landslide. The people had spoken. They wanted independence. But the government in West Pakistan refused to accept the election results. They refused to hand over power. They refused to recognize the will of the people. The tensions that had been building for years exploded into open conflict. In March 1971, the Bangladesh Liberation War began. It was a brutal conflict that lasted 9 months. Millions more died. By December 1971, East Pakistan had become the independent nation of Bangladesh. The cyclone didn't cause that war, but it exposed everything that was broken in the relationship between East and West Pakistan. It showed that the government would not protect its people. It showed that the people had no voice. It showed that change had to come, whether the government wanted it or not. The new nation of Bangladesh learned a hard lesson. The government could not rely on the federal authorities in Pakistan. They had to prepare themselves. They had to build their own defenses against the cyclones that would inevitably come again. And so Bangladesh began construction of a revolutionary system. Cyclone shelters were built across all coastal regions. Thousands of them. Sturdy concrete structures built on elevated platforms. Designed to withstand the storm surge. Designed to protect the people. Warning systems were established. Radio networks that could reach even remote islands. Sirens that would alert communities to danger. Visual signals. Door-to-door warnings. Anything to make sure that no one would be caught unaware again. Volunteer networks were trained. Young people who would go out ahead of the storm. Help the elderly evacuate. Assist the disabled. Make sure that people understood the danger and knew where to go. Education programs were developed. Children learned in school what to do if a cyclone came. Families practiced evacuation drills. Everyone knew the plan. In 1991, 2 decades after the Bola cyclone, another major cyclone struck Bangladesh. It was nearly as strong as the 1970 storm. Wind speeds were comparable. The storm surge was massive. By all rights, it should have killed hundreds of thousands of people again. But it didn't. The death toll was around 135,000. A catastrophic number. One of the deadliest cyclones in history. But less than 1/3 of the deaths from Bola. The difference was preparation. The shelters saved lives. The warnings saved lives. The trained volunteers saved lives. People had somewhere to go. People knew when to go. People had a chance to survive. Since then, Bangladesh has continued to improve its cyclone preparedness. The system today is recognized worldwide as a model. Other countries study what Bangladesh has built. Other nations have adopted similar systems. When cyclones strike now, the death tolls are measured in hundreds, not hundreds of thousands. Sometimes even fewer. This progress is written in the memory of the people who survived Bola. People who remembered the night the water rose. People who lost everything. Today, 50 years later, the Ganges Delta still exists. The rivers still flow. The monsoons still come. The cyclone season still arrives. The geography hasn't changed. The water is still warm. The storms will keep forming. But the people living in the Delta now have what their grandparents didn't have: shelters, warnings. a government that takes their safety seriously. Systems built by people who remember what happened when those things were absent. The Deadliest Cyclone killed more people than any storm in history. But its legacy is not only one of death. Its legacy is also of transformation, of a nation learning, of a people deciding that it would never happen again. The Deadliest Cyclone stands as a reminder that the deadliest disasters are often not about how strong the storm is. They are about who is in the storm's path. They're about how prepared that population is. They're about whether the government cares enough to protect its people. 500,000 people died in a single night. That number should never be forgotten. The lessons learned from that night have already saved countless lives, and will continue to save lives for generations to come. Thank you for taking the time to learn this story. Please share this with others. History teaches us that preparation saves lives, that government accountability matters, that the lives of poor people matter just as much as anyone else's. Stay informed, stay prepared,